Tohono Nation, welcome to another segment of our show. We're certainly glad you can join us today. This sunny, I think it's still morning, so we're in Tucson, Arizona today. And but before we get started, I wanted to thank you for the many viewers that we got on our last interview with the David and Lana. But I just wanted to point out that what I forgot to mention, that we did put their information on there if you wanted to get in touch with them in regards to doing quinceañeras. As you know, they had mentioned that. So, but I just wanted to let you know about that before we get started. So again, we're here and very excited about our guest today. I was glad that he accepted our invitation, and as you know, that every year there's a Waila festival that is put on, and it's been going on for a number of years. And so today we have the co-founder of this Waila festival, and so I wanted you to introduce himself and give him a little background on himself, where he's from. But he's also from the very famous, iconic Joaquin brother family, and so I'm even more excited about that. But what I had mentioned to him that I wanted to talk about the Waila Festival and everything that surrounded and how it began, but I asked him if he'd come back later and talk more about Waila music, because he has been involved in a various aspect of music, of folk music. So I find that very interesting, and I'm sure that you'll find that interesting as well. So again, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Joaquin, for joining us. And if you can go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers.
I'm Angelo Joaquin Jr. My late father is Angelo Joaquin Sr. from Jowak, Covered Wells, and my late mother, is from Florence, Salopik, and she's Marcelina Williams. I'm not a musician. We should get that out there right away, but I have had the opportunity to work in music and with musicians and dancers. People seem to forget about dancers. If there weren't any dancers, why would you play music?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I've had the opportunity to work for festivals and help them put on these events where you're bringing in people who are creative. The Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix has this slogan that says that the music is the language of the heart. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that. I've heard that from all of the musicians and others, but in particular all of the musicians who say, if you play happy, it's contagious. It shows in your music, and it affects the people who are dancing to your music. If you've got negative feelings, it shows too, and it affects everybody. So one of the things that I have always tried to do in these events that I work with is to make sure that the musicians are happy. If they're happy, hey, it's a great event. I asked Joe Wilson, who was the president of the National Council for the Traditional Arts one time. I said, Joe, what's the secret? I've never felt the ambiance that I feel here at the National Folk Festival. And he was saying, well, I guess if there was a secret, it would be that we put this on for the musicians. And again, if you keep them happy, that's all we're doing. That's all we hope to do. We just let the public in to pay the bills. And so that was a different way at looking at an event like this. And I thought it was heartwarming. It was something that you could do to help people get away from their problems and for a while just be happy. In fact, all the musicians say that their role is to make the people happy.
And I certainly would agree with you as far as all kinds of genre music does bring out a good feeling, whether you're happy or you're sad, it just changes your mood in regards to what you're listening to. But, as far as Waila, that's been, I've been around for over 60 years and have heard different various types of Waila music. And, but let's touch on the Waila Festival and where that idea or that thought, because you're a co-founder of the Waila Festival and that started some years ago. Was that the idea, or what was the intent back then?
When I went to the National Folk Festival with my dad's band, I saw that interaction between an audience that didn't know Waila, but they embraced it, and this energy came from the band and was turned around by the crowd, and it got higher and higher. And I thought all Waila bands should experience this, experience appreciation. And so when we got back, I spent 9 years volunteering for national, regional, local events to find out how to put on a festival. And finally, in 1989, we decided that we would do the Waila Festival. And we had 3 components in our mission statement. One was to promote and foster Waila music and musicians. The second was to present the music in a professional setting with lights and sound text. And third was to share this outdoor tradition with our southern Arizona neighbors. And so the Waila Festival, right from the beginning, wasn't aimed at O'odham people. It was aimed at the people who live in Tucson and southern Arizona, because we all come together. Some of us, because our creation story says this was made for us and we're to take care of it, the Tohono. And others who have moved here and they've fallen in love with the desert and they're here because they want to be here. So we felt that the festival would enable people to get a better idea of the unique richness of this region. And Tohono O'odham had done a good job in isolating themselves for many years, and there are a number of reasons for that. But we felt that music could form a bridge that would allow that wall that was up between the nation and Tucson and the other southern Arizona communities, and would bring people together just to be themselves. I always remember after the first festival, Danny Lopez asked an elder, well, what did you think about all these Mitigan here dancing to Waila? And the elder said, they're not that bad. So we felt that if we could get people, everyone who came, to walk away and say, you know what, they're not that bad. We've done a great service to the people who live here. And that's something that I've always felt was important and will continue to be what I aim for. One of the things that amazed me about the Waila Festival is my dad was born in 1929, and when he was about 6 years old, he was told, if you hear a motor vehicle coming down the highway, run into the Tohono and hide, because and don't come out until we come in after you. And that's because Mitigan, or white people, were the only ones that owned vehicles, and they were coming to villages and forcibly taking young O'odham back here to Tucson to go to boarding school. And in a mere 60 years, less than 60 years, because of the festival, we had Mirdagan, white people, and all of them, and other people of culture, of different cultures, sitting next to each other, eating all of them food, dancing out there next to each other. And I thought that was a huge leap in terms of acceptance on the part of everybody, both all of them and none of them. The fact that we live here, we're people, we're neighbors, we enjoy music, we enjoy cultural traditions. So that's one of the reasons that the Waila Festival came into being, and I'm really proud of that. The other reason was back then, in the late 80s, the first festival was 1989. Mm-hmm. In the late 80s, there seemed to be a lot of animosity between the bands. Mm-hmm. And I think it was because of the battle. There were a lot of battles of the bands going on, and the judging wasn't necessarily what you wanted to be.
Right.
And they became instead popularity contests. And so that made for bad feelings between bands. And so when we started the festival, I made clear to every band, this isn't a competition. You're coming here to show what you can do in a very short period of time. You are representing not only Waila musicians of today, but the past and the future. And your role is such that it's necessary for you to do the best that you can. And they took that message, mm-hmm. I thought. And just to force it a little bit more, we had what we called a jam session, and still do, where we, at that time, we were putting together bands. From the 4 bands, we'd make up 4 more bands. And so all of a sudden, a musician who plays every weekend with the same people was up on stage with 4 people they didn't know.
Right, yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're having to listen a little bit closer. They're having to adapt to the sound that was being produced. And they would walk away, you know, feeling that they had shown their skills, mm-hmm. and that they respected all of a sudden their skills a little bit more, and certainly respected the skills of the people around them. So again, from the beginning, it was what can be called a community building event, all components of the Waila Festival.
And yeah, I would certainly agree. I mean, it's interesting that you were saying that when you said from the beginning that music brings a certain environment or mood, but in this case, you were bridging a gap. What you mentioned as far as Mirdagan coming and taking all the kids to boarding school. So in this Waila Festival, it was perhaps taking that away and more of that we shouldn't be afraid. And like I said, more of a community connection with Mirdagan and our music. And using that, not so much autumn nyok, but the music that we isolated on the nation. But now you're becoming to expose that, you know, with Mirdagan and probably other nationalities, but also the food that you mentioned as well.
Right.
I remember my mother at the time when she was alive, and that you wanted traditional food, and I think we had made squash, but again, that was a mixture of traditional food and music. And I haven't heard that word jam session for a while that you mentioned. That I don't think I've maybe perhaps there has been some jam sessions, but I haven't seen that. But that's interesting that how you put that as far as jam sessions and eliminating the animosity between the bands or hey, we're coming to, like you said, there were three components. One was to promoting and bringing some professional lighting, sound, and to share, to showcase the professionalism of those bands that were, have been around the nation but never exposed to or playing opportunity. And I think that's great that was done.
You mentioned filling the gap in food. One of the things that I have found over the years, and I've done what we call Young White Musicians workshops, where we bring kids from the age of 12 to maybe 20 and work with 10 veteran musicians at the School of Music at the university. And one of the things that the festival and the workshop made clear is that we were bringing people together. We were bringing all of them together for the music, but there was so much more that was being exchanged. The language was being used, the values were being shared. Parts of the tradition that a lot of people didn't know were being shared by a panel that we put together. And basically the panel was saying, you have a role. Your role is to make the people happy. And music has brought me back whenever I was ill. It was music that brought me back, whether it was alcoholism, whether it was a serious illness, physical illness. It was the music that brought me back. And so they encouraged the kids, continue to hone your skills. You're doing something that not everybody can do, was chosen to do. And number two is that you can have a choice. You can take this route where you go through the liquor and the drink and stuff like that. Or if you're going to be coming back anyway, why not just go this way and completely sidestep this problematic area? Because in the end, it's the music that's going to make you whole. And so we've tried to do that. With regard to the food, we asked our food booths to offer a traditional dish. Sito, bayadisito, hun, bao, gaisa, chonan. And the chonan was interesting because overall, we wanted to give people an experience, not only autumn and non-autumn, but the vendors themselves. And so we encouraged them to bring children, choiblets. And some young autumn had never eaten choiblets. And so here they are eating this food that in any other setting they probably wouldn't touch. But guess what? It's traditional food. And so again, we were trying to provide this experience for everyone that was there. And since then, since the 1990s, any festival you go to here in Tucson has children. And it's not necessarily an autumn group that picked it and prepared it. And so, again, that's one of those things that we felt would bring us closer together as peoples of different culture. And with regard to artisans, we brought in people who would put together artwork that promoted traditional values and icons, and would just give people a chance to find out a little bit more about autumn and take a prized possession home. So it was well-rounded, and people don't probably appreciate how much work that goes into a festival, because one of the things that you look at are the pathways. We made people walk past, when they walked in the gate, they walked right past the food booths, and they get the smell of the food, they get the smell of that sweet smell of mesquite burning, and right away you're in a different place. It sets the mood, and then you hear the music, and then you see the artists, and all of that comes together. Eventually they're going to make their way back to the food booths at least once, and to go home they have to go past the food booths again, and maybe they'll pick something up to take home. So all of this takes a lot of coordination, and we were lucky to have so many people who were dedicated to helping us out, and we had maybe 50 volunteers, but most of them were Mitagan. They were involved. That's how much the Mitagan liked it. And one of the things that continues to blow me away is towards the end of the festival, that when we held it at Verdown Field, we found out that Germans were planning their U.S. visits around the Waila Festival. They wanted to take that in. And the attraction of Waila bands is they're playing polkas, schottisches, and mazurkas that are living traditions in communities in the East and other countries all across the United States. And much as my Uncle Daniel used to say, we tend to speak English with an accent, we play music with an accent. So it was the same music or the same form, but it sounded a little bit different, and that's what was the attraction for people.
Yeah, I think that what you were saying about that, as far as Europeans making their arrangements or their vacation around the Waila Festival, and I think it's good for viewers to know that polka is German, and like you said, it's just we're just playing in a different dialect. Some of them were going out there dancing, and they were surprised that they knew how to dance. You see all these Americans dancing out there, Waila, and which I found interesting when you said that, because it was kind of, I never thought about that.
For the first festival in 1989, we brought in, one of our sponsors was the elderly program. That's what it was called back then. And so a number of elders were brought in. They were guests of the festival. Now we had them set up to get out on the dance floor to demonstrate the steps. And all of them tend to sit around for a while before they get up and dance. These elders didn't even have a chance to get out on the dance floor because the Mitagan came out there and started dancing. They didn't wait. And I've seen video of all of them standing on the side, just looking at them, saying, how can they dance to our music and dance so well? And again, I think that all of them believe that it's our tradition. No, it's borrowed. Again, it's one of those parts of the music. The history of the music is when the missionaries came through, they thought that they could convert all of them faster to Catholicism if there were all of them playing music for Mass and other services. So they taught a few of them to play the fiddle. Well, these guys promptly, I like to say, went over the hill and started playing the music that they heard in the region, which were the polkas and the schottisches and the mazurkas that were brought in by Europeans along the borderland. And when out of that came the fiddle bands. Generally you had two fiddles, an acoustic guitar, a bass drummer, and a snare drummer. We, for a number of years at the Waila Festival, would have one fiddle band. that would perform, and we could see and hear the roots to contemporary Waila music.
When you started the Waila Festival, and I know there's always, challenges from the beginning. So what kind of challenges did you have from the beginning as you move forward? Then I know that you had it in various locations, but was there any challenges to putting this on? I know you mentioned volunteers. You had a lot of volunteers. Was there any challenges back then?
Right from the beginning, we had a 15-member team. I suppose you could call them board, but it was more like a team. 8 of them were autumn. A number of them were musicians. And then we brought in people from the Tucson communities, lawyers, doctors, anthropologists, folklorists, things like that. And so a lot of these people were already familiar with the music. And so it went pretty smoothly. I can't think of any particular problems that we might have faced that we didn't solve right away. I was on the board of the North American Folk Music and Dance Alliance, and we put on this conference once a year, and I sat in on one of the workshops, and organizers were asking the presenter, what do you do about people that won't come to your festival? You invite them, those people and those communities, and they don't show. And I said, well, for the Waila Festival, those people were Anglos. And so what we did was bring them on right away. Some of them who knew the tradition and who could promote it among their communities. I remember Christine Frank from Bidfields asked me, we had one food booth, and she asked me, Angelo, how many people are going to be coming? I said, Christine, we've never done this before. Have no idea. She said, well, I need some kind of number to get supplies to cover. And I said, okay, 300. We got 3,000. So again, any problems that we might have had, later the problems we're too big to fit in, in the Historical Society. We were taxing their facilities. And so at that point, actually after the second year, we had 2 stages, one inside and one outside. And so people could go back and forth and had to go through the food booths to do that. So the problems were more of growth.
I know you had moved it, and you said you had it in, on the U of A Bear Down Field, and you said the growth of it, you had moved it in various places.
The first 10 years we held it at the Arizona Historical Society, and we used the street, we used the parking lot behind it, and we still couldn't cram everybody in. They were jammed together, and so we worked out a deal with the University of Arizona to use Bear Down Field, which is a soccer field, and that gave room for one festival, probably the last one. We had about an estimated 7,000 people show.
Wow.
And so those kinds of numbers, 5,000 and above, make it necessary to change the way you're presenting. More food booths. You probably need, well, we had only one stage. We couldn't have the artisans anymore because we tried one year, but because of the music and no walls, like at the Historical Society, the customers were yelling at the vendors, and they're yelling back. I mean, they're screaming at each other because they can't hear each other over the music. So we unfortunately had to drop that, artisans. But a lot of the problems we had were from growth, because of growth.
Which is good. I mean, as far as the Waila Festival. So from 25 years ago, fast moving forward, have you tried to keep how it was, the music, Waila music, have you tried to keep it the way it was back then to the way it is now? Because I know it has progressed along the way as far as musicians.
Now, things happen in cycles. Mm-hmm. So what people call old school Waila,
right,
and I call the real Waila, is going to come back in another generation or so, when all of them say, you know what, I remember the music that my parents listened to and danced to. I'd like to hear that kind of music. And indeed, I went to the elders before the first Waila Festival and asked them, what would you like to see in a festival? And they said, we want to hear the music that was played by our fathers and our grandfathers, or in that style. Mm-hmm. We want to hear the tunes that they played, or tunes in that style. Mm-hmm. So that's something that's always stuck with me. People of my generation today, we want to hear that again.
Right.
It takes you on a journey back to when you were a kid and a teenager and a young adult. And there were some very precious moments there for people. And that's why I like to bring on bands that are experienced. This may be one of the last times they play, and so I want to give them a chance to share their music once more. Mm-hmm. with all of them who really appreciate that kind of music. With regard to where the music is going, it's going to go where people take it. But my feeling is, whatever the form of Waila, and it's probably not Waila. I don't know what you would call it, nearly Waila or almost Waila. But you need to be able to trace that music back to its roots, which is old school Waila. And if you don't understand that, then the music can't be as valid to you and to others if you can't listen to a tune and say, oh, I can hear some of the old stuff in there, some of the old passages, the runs, things like that. And so I think that one of the things that once again will happen is people will want to dance. And dance bands provide wailas, jaudes, and mazurkas. And so they are popular. Mm-hmm. But it's the old music that I think has the most to offer in terms of dancing. And if we don't do that, if we don't have these bands that are playing the old music, we lose the dance tradition, because nobody's going to be dancing. If they're not playing, people won't learn how to dance. I've watched young people, and I'm not criticizing, but a lot of them can't dance. They can't do the ballroom style. And to me, that's sad.
Right.
Because I'm going to get myself in trouble. One of the great things about Waila is watching all of them. And all of them are not little people. But when they get on the dance floor, they glide. They glide. And to lose that is such a shame, to lose that tradition.
Right, and I would agree with you, and that's certainly has changed. But you mentioned old school, the roots, and I think for our viewers is that our younger viewers that were born now in the 90s, 2000s, or maybe even the 80s, that there is some roots to Waila music, and what you were saying about old school, and now it's almost white. Maybe it's almost Waila. And so because like in this, you had your various music, rock and roll music, different music back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those bands are now. Now kids are in the 90s are listening to that music, but once those bands are gone, now you have various bands that are still alive and maybe have 2 people left, and like for example, the Joaquin brothers, your dad, who is a very, like, I would compare it to like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. But a different genre of music. But when those, Mick Jagger's still fronting, but he's in his 70s or 80s. But when he's gone, so how does that music change? Music changes, and your environment changes, but you can't stop time either.
Right.
But but I think you yourself, as a music lover, as a cultural, being involved in folks, can keep that alive, and as far as where that all came from, and your own perspective of where it's headed, where you think it's, it's like you mentioned, the roots. There is a root to this, as far as all of them.
Right. Well, one of the things that was attractive to folk festivals about Tohono and Waila music is that the question would be asked, what is a bunch of Indians in the southern Arizona desert doing dancing to polka, shadishes, and mazurkas? And so then one of the things, and here's the other thing we did at the Waila Festival, we were training bands for these festivals. You have 50 minutes. You need to be able to put the music in context for the audience. You need to be able to talk to them about autumn life in general. You need to fill in those gaps and make it more interesting. When you leave, people should know more about autumn than they did when they got there. And so one of the things that I've always felt that is, if a folk festival wanted a Waila band, they were looking for these 3 forms, polka, shadishes, and mazurkas, to present, because other people in their region, other people from their cultures, were familiar with those forms. It was just sounding a little bit different, and that was the attraction for Waila bands. I don't know what folk festivals are looking for today, but they might be happy to have bands that don't play those 3 kinds of tunes. But I think that in order to present a better picture of who we are, then you would have a band that can play that kind of music.
So are you finding that at this day and age that those bands still exist today?
Oh, certainly. There are a number of bands who, and this isn't to say they don't play some of the contemporary stuff,
Right.
but they're deeply rooted in the old music, and they play it, and they're the ones that older O'odham people in my generation really appreciate. And I think there are efforts on the O'odham reservation to teach people how to dance to those tunes. So as long as there are people that want to dance, those bands will be the ones that they're going to follow and dance to.
Yeah, I think there was some effort there, but I don't know if it still exists. But I know there's some in our school system. There is that, teaching about music, and I think it's good as far as having that kind of history that you have as far as Waila music, but also being passed on. It may not sound the same as various bands back in the 60s or 70s, but you may have a different, because of the, I don't know if the instruments have changed through the years, and probably have, have a different sound, and now you can make different sounds as far as music.
Right.
So
when my dad started his band in 1954, he had volunteered for the Indian Relocation Act, and so he ended up in Los Angeles, and there was a sizable community of O'odham living there. And so they approached him and said, "You're a musician, we want to hear the music of the desert." And so he put together a band. Luckily, there were a number of relatives who came forward and played with him, but they had a trumpet, they had a saxophone and guitar and bass, the stand-up bass. And at that point, they really didn't have drums. But you got a different sound. You got a fuller sound, I think, than you do in many cases today. So I really appreciate that kind of variety in terms of what's being produced.
As far as the Waila Festival, I know it's always been held here in Tucson. Have you ever thought about trying it in Phoenix?
I understand they had one there.
But you didn't put it
No,
on?
no.
Somebody else?
No, I understand they had one there, and they stopped producing that festival a couple years ago. No, I haven't thought about it again because, and I'll think about it now, but we were intent on making the Waila Festival a Tucson event. People were saying in the beginning, "Why don't you take it out on the reservation?" And I said, because other cultures aren't going to come out to the reservation and be part of it. So if we can create a safe place in Tucson where people can come and just be themselves, whether they're O'odham or not, that's what will make this an event that's a Tucson event. It's an O'odham tradition that's become a Tucson event. And so that's the major difference. I don't know much about that festival up there, but I don't think they had that kind of outreach into the Phoenix area.
You mentioned outreach, so how do you do your outreach as far as, I know it's probably people coming in, word of mouth, but what other ways you do your outreach?
Well, for the Waila Festival, we primarily did radio. I don't think we did much TV, but a lot of it was word of mouth. We had a gentleman on our team who spoke fluent German, and so he would put together notices, and they'd be sent to German communities here and abroad, telling them about the music. We had, because they were mostly Merigan volunteers, they would go out and talk to people. And so when someone would come to me and say, I want to volunteer for the Waila Festival, I'd ask, have you been here before? And I said, no. And I said, how about if you enjoy this one? Get to know what it's about. And then next year, maybe you can be a volunteer because you'll have this experience behind you. And one of the things that we never really did was recruit. People came to us. Bands came to us. Can I play? I've always felt when someone shows up at your door and says, I want to be part of what you're doing, then that's a good thing. Then it's better than going out and please come down to the festival and play. So it was largely word of mouth. And if you think about the very first festival bringing in 3,000 people, that right from the beginning there was the word going out. Each of those 3,000 told 2 people, and they told, it grew and grew. And so again, because it was a Tucson tradition or a Tucson event, people felt compelled to be part of the event, to be a part of the community on a deeper level.
Yeah, well, I see your point as far as making this a central area. You mentioned that going back as far as the workshops that came out of this, other than the Waila Festival, it took some other direction as far as creating a workshop that you mentioned. Can you touch on that a bit more?
Well, that was part of our mission, which was to promote and develop Waila music and musicians. And when we put that on, I have found that you can plan an event and you want something to happen, and it never happens the way you planned it.
Right.
It happens the way it's supposed to happen. And so we brought in veteran musicians, 2 on each instrument, and whatever instrument the kids wanted to play, they'd go to them and learn a bit. And then we'd have this panel at noon where the veteran musicians talked about music and what it meant to them. And then we'd go back into session, they'd come together and play one tune, these kids. Well, that night, we put them on stage at the Historical Society. And for many of them, it was the first time ever to not only be on stage, but with a crowd.
Right.
And these weren't necessarily the Waila Festival. They were an event, a component of the Young Waila Musicians Workshop. Well, it doesn't do any good to teach somebody and then not let them show what they learned. And so we would put them up on stage with their instructors, and they were performing, and everybody went home standing a little bit taller because they had done something they hadn't done before, the kids. The musicians certainly went home standing taller because nobody had ever asked them, teach me.
I think that says a lot as far as what you just said. Nobody ever asks us, and I think that's one of the things that you mentioned, that from the beginning that Merigan comes, go and hide, and so that kind of creates a stigma, and where that I mean, there's so much, to me, there's so much gifts on the nation, not just musicians, but artists and cooks and other things, but they're afraid to ask, or afraid to show, and like they lack confidence. But with this, like you mentioned, you gave them something, and you expose them to the outside world off the reservation. That, hey, you have an audience, which says a lot as far as what you've done from the past and what you created. Doing that from back in the 89, 90s, that you finally exposed and brought this to Tucson. Surprisingly, it's grown to where it is now. And so that says a lot as far as that, whether it be music or among other things, that you can succeed off the nation, and you just have to go out and do it.
One of the reasons we held the Young Waila Musicians Workshop at the School of Music on campus, the U of A campus, is because we wanted kids to come on campus. And again, for many of them, it was the first time.
Right.
They hear about the university, but perhaps a lot of them think, oh, I'll never be there. And then all of a sudden, you're in this facility that is specially built for music. And I think that is one of the things that we brought about, that experience. Basically, all of this festival, workshop, and other work is to provide experiences. It's not necessarily to teach. People will learn what they need to learn or what they want to learn, but you need to have a venue where that can happen, and it provides an experience.
Right.
And so again, when it comes down to do I want the music to go this way or that way, to me it doesn't matter. But I do want the people who play the old style to continue playing. I want to give them a chance to not only share their music, but to give the dancers, those of us who grew up during this era, that they were playing, a chance to go back down memory lane.
Yeah, memory lane. Yeah, but that equates to old school music, like you said. You always want to go back, say, well, those were the good old days. But like I said, times have changed to where we're saying, well, I see, people just don't, some people don't know how to divide it nowadays. But I used to people see this just glide on the dance floor. I mean, some were really good at Waila, and you're right, you could just glide. And now you have the Waila Festival that is scheduled for May 17th and 18th for 2 days. Normally it's 1 day. Am I right?
Well, the Waila Celebration out at Desert Diamond started out as a 1 day. This is the third year. It's growing.
Right.
Last year, the very first year, we had 4 bands and 4 food booths. Last year, we went to 2 days, and we had 8 bands and 6 food booths and 10 artisans. This year, we have 10 bands and 10 food booths and I believe 12 artisans. So it's growing, and again, we use the music, or in my mind, you use the music to bring people in.
Right.
And then while they're there, they get exposed to children and other Tohono traditional foods, the expression of the culture through art, And so again, it's one of those experiences that whether you're out them or not, you might not ever get. And I'm really happy to be working with the Diamond Casino to do that, to further the tradition. And I think that in presenting the music and the dancing and the food and the artists, that they're doing an important service to the Tohono people.
I understand that it's going to be inside, if I'm right.
That's one of the major changes. We grappled with the heat over the last 2 years.
I see.
In May it's hot. Right. And we couldn't provide enough shade for the crowd. And it wasn't so people wouldn't come until the sun was going down. And so it was decided that if we moved the bands inside, it's air-conditioned, people will come earlier and perhaps stay later. And the later they stay, the more they have to eat, and the more they have to walk around and look at artisans. So all of this is, part of the plan, part of the experience that we're offering.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering why they were moving it inside, because I saw them were used to dancing outside under the stores or even during the day sometimes. But like you said, it was people would, not just all of them, but other people would come and deal with the heat.
Besides the heat, though, we were running out of room. I mean, that crowd got pretty big last year. And so the dance floor kind of shrunk. And so by having it inside, there's a dance floor there, and you can get more people seated. And people will be able to take in food from the outside. There are going to be some tables set up. And so you can come in and have your meal inside. And I think that is something that's going to be taken advantage of. I mean, what better way to enjoy children or pop over than to have live music?
Is there any future thoughts or anything as far as the changes or I know you talked about as far as music, you want to keep that as original as possible, but also the food and things like that. Is there any future ideas or anything that may change as far as how? As far as leaving it here in Tucson, but any ideas or anything like that?
I would love to see a workshop. We had the young Waila musicians workshop. Maybe we should have the elder Waila musicians workshop, where you would have.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Because that's where you would hear the old songs, and any of the younger musicians who want to come and learn would be able to, and they get to play with some of these older, more experienced musicians. So one of the criticisms I've heard is that even the tunes that are old school played by some new bands, it doesn't play the tune all the way through. It mixes up a bunch of tunes, and I've been told, they're changing it. And I said, they're not changing it. They just never heard the original. They never heard how the song was put together. My Uncle Daniel used to say, a song has a very definite beginning, a middle, and the end, and they're all different. And if you don't tell that story, if they're not in the right order, you're not telling the story. His concept was that each tune tells a story. There's something embedded in there. And if it's not offered correctly, then that message is never taken.
And I think that's good to know for our viewers that there is like you said, a message in a song. And particularly, you mentioned your dad, that the way he looked at it, and the way the old school music, told a story. And it's true for any person who writes lyrics or songs and things like that. He tells a story. But through Waila, there's no words, but he tells a story. If you really listen to it.
If you listen to some of the old recordings, you're going to hear sounds that take the place of words. Mm-hmm. And, they have to be there for it to make sense. And if you've never heard the original, then you're going to miss out on that. You just play it straight through. I talked about runs, changing keys, tempo, stopping in the middle of a tune and starting up again. Those are all nuances that dancers look for to enjoy the music. A lot of people don't realize that listening to music isn't necessarily hearing it. Mm-hmm. You can listen to music, but if you don't hear it, if you don't hear those little changes, then you've lost out. You're just listening. So that's one of the things that I have found is when I listen to a band, I not only listen to the tune, but also is there a good balance. You should be able to hear every one of those instruments, and sometimes you can't. You only hear one or two, and to me that's a disservice to not only the music but to the other musicians and to the dancers.
There's a quote that you said. I really like this quote. And you said, when one is not particularly good at anything, one gains a treasure trove of experience finding that out.
That's me. I'm not really good at anything. I can talk a lot. I'm good at talking. I think that I'm able to listen to people, and that's really important. Mm-hmm. Some elder, I can't remember, he was from another tribe, was talking to our elders out at Santa Vera one time, and he said he was talking about kids that really didn't pay attention to him. And so he was saying, yes, I tell these kids, there's a reason that Creator gave you one mouth and two ears. It's more important to listen. And so that's, one of the things that I've tried to do is to listen and understand what people may want. And in terms of what I've done in my life, I tend to stay in a position till I get it to where it's better than it was before. Mm-hmm. Then I kind of get bored and move on to something else. And it's been a heck of a life. And if it wasn't for those experiences, the thing is, if you're good at basketball, that's probably pretty much what you're going to play. As a vocation, it's going to be a vocation. You'll have other interests, but you're going to be devoting a good part of your life to playing basketball because you're good at it. If you're not good at anything, then you get this thing, you're trying to find out what you're good at. Right. And in the meantime, you get all this experience that is so wonderful. And I encourage everyone, young Adam, older Adam, don't wait. Do it now. Just do it. If you think about it too much, you won't do it. Just do it. Jump in.
That is true. I really love this quote because I totally agree with you that, just with life experiences, and you create this treasure of knowledge that you can share or speak about. And certainly, you've lived a long life. We both lived a long life as far as our own experiences, in particular your brothers, Joaquin brothers, and that you said from the beginning, well, I don't play music, but you love music, but you're sharing that by doing the Waila Festival and being involved as far as other areas, folk music, and just music in general, So, but I want to really thank you for, and really appreciate you, agreeing to do our show, and for our viewers to get some idea as far as actually having somebody who is the co-founder of the Waila Festival and what music means to him and his own thoughts. But I have asked him to come back again because there's so much that I've told him that we can talk about as far as Waila in general. And we touched that. He touched on that briefly as far as his own thoughts and where it's going. But I know that he's worked for the nation as well. That we didn't touch on those. And like I said, it's just, I think sometimes we always talk about our elder. I'm an elder too. so, that our younger often should hear and be able to know what has happened in the past. And I think that's what you've done. Certainly have probably made an impression on other people, and without really knowing or giving them something through the years, with as many Waila festivals that you've put on. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, I want to thank you for being on our show, and I hope we can sit down again and talk more about it. So is there anything you want to say in closing to our viewers?
I would just add that not only do you want to just jump in, you have to be willing to fail.
Right.
If you're not willing to fail, you won't do it. You'll be scared to do it. Just jump in. I don't necessarily think there's anything as a mistake, such as a mistake, because you learn something from it. Hopefully you don't do it again. And lastly, I would say I've been blessed with the opportunity to do what I like. And that's the big difference. You have to like what you're doing. You have to believe in it. And I see a lot of people in jobs where they're there for the money, for the prestige, I don't know, for a lot of things. Those are great, but it's when it comes from here that it makes such a difference, and it is rewarding and helps me feel.
Yeah, well, you said as far as coming from the heart. So you want to share with our audience the Waila Festival this year, as far as information?
Sure. On May the 17th and 18th, out at the Desert Diamond Casino in Sahuarita, mm-hmm. we will have 2 nights of dancing and eating and looking at, appreciating art. And I encourage everyone to come on out, mm-hmm. be part of it, whether you're all of them or not. Again, this is something that we have to do as O'odham people to make sure that those traditions continue. And by sharing them with our neighbors, we're able to really celebrate this place that we call home.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, to answer our segment for today, we certainly want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us today, and certainly, again, thanking Mr. Joaquin for coming onto our show, and hopefully You got a little educated on Waila and his own thoughts, and times have changed. Old school music to where we're at today. So, and hopefully, if you're interested, please attend the Waila Festival and see what it's all about. Taste great food, and now you're going to be not having to sweat dancing around, and so you'll be inside. So again, thank you for joining us today, and have a great day or have a great evening. Thank you.